Anacacia is really delighted to welcome you here today. It's great to have the Honourable Josh Frydenberg MP. Look, very well known to our Australian investors and community, but perhaps less known to our overseas investors and friends. So look, Josh is the federal member for Kooyong, which is in Melbourne. He's the Treasurer of Australia, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, which is currently in government. He's an accomplished tennis player, and he studied economics, law, philosophy, and public administration at Monash, Oxford, and Harvard. So a real underachiever. He's worked in banking before Parliament, where he's had several senior portfolio roles, including obviously currently as the Treasurer. He's also a really great guy, so let's just get straight on to the first question for Josh. Look, Josh, as you know, Anacacia invests in leading small, medium enterprises. Typically for us, those are companies with revenues normally of sort of 20 to 300 million per annum. So pretty decent employers in the economy. It's obviously really a turbulent time for all businesses, including SMEs. So really interested in just your perspective on how the government's helping that segment and how it can help SMEs really rebuild and thrive in the current environment.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to join with you today. Although I'd like to be here in better circumstances. It's a challenging time for the Australian economy, for the global economy, but particularly here in Victoria. We've got a situation where more than 5 million people are in lockdown, and obviously a curfew's been in place, as well as business closures, school closures, and other restrictions on people's movement. So a really difficult time. And the Australian economy, prior to this second wave of cases in Victoria, was really picking up. We saw manufacturing activity start to get to where it was pre-COVID levels. The wage data was improving. Retail sales were also showing a movement in the right direction, and the ABS jobs data for the month of June was better than market expectations, with more than 210,000 people finding a job. In terms of where the government's focus has been, Jeremy, it's very much been on supporting the incomes of people who have been hit by both the supply and the demand shock, and the JobKeeper program in particular, which has been available to many in the SME sector, has got around 3.5 million workers currently on it. It's paying a flat $1,500 payment. We've also sought to provide loans into the SME sector, guaranteeing with the banks on a 50-50 basis, loans of up to $1 million with a 5-year tenor that can be used both for working capital but also for investment purposes. So that's another initiative that we've undertaken. We've also got a program called the Cash Flow Boost, based on the size of a small businesses and medium-sized businesses payroll. We have focused on giving them up to $100,000 in order to help them with either their fixed costs or their wages bill or other expenses as come through the door. So there's some of the various programs we're doing. On the incentives for investment side, we obviously have a instant asset write-off, which we've extended out to December at $150,000 for businesses with a turnover of under $500 million. And we've also put in place a 50% accelerated depreciation allowance out to mid next year. So what we're trying to do is bring forward some of that expenditure that was put in the too hard basket for a business, giving them that extra incentive to take it on board as a way of stimulating some economic activity, but also contributing to their future productivity enhancing potential.
Awesome. No, look, that's great, Josh. And I know lots of companies have obviously benefited from that. Hey, look, in terms of sort of Anacacia is very fortunate, as you know, to have a good mix of sort of both local and overseas investors in both our private equity and public equity funds. At a time, I guess, for many countries like Australia, like you said, are having to close their borders, is obviously, a difficult time from a health perspective. But many are also talking about reduced international trade and foreign investment. I mean, interested in your perspective on whether or not you have any particular message, particularly for our foreign investors who are sort of backing Australian fund managers investing in local SMEs. Any particular thoughts about sort of foreign investment, sort of, longer term and into the sort of funds management sector in Australia?
Well, certainly the government, the country has a welcome mat open to foreign investment. We're a net importer of capital, even though we've got this growing pool of savings under superannuation, now around $3 trillion. But we do need to import capital, particularly in the infrastructure space. And so we do welcome foreign investment. We're also, like other major developed economies, putting the ruler over that foreign investment to make sure it's within the national interest. And we reduced the threshold for screening down to $0 out to the end of the year. And we've announced some other reforms around foreign investment, particularly around the national security test. But we absolutely welcome foreign investment. It's worked very well for Australia. It's been key to the development and everything from mining to tourism to transport infrastructure to renewable energy, and will continue to be so. So we look forward to welcoming in foreign investment. And the other thing that we've done, obviously, is entered into many free trade agreements, so that now we have a situation where more than 70% of our two-way trading relationships are covered by FTAs, whereas when we came to government just over 6 years ago, it was around 26%. And those free trade agreements not only encourage the exchange of goods and services, but also ensure a greater flow of capital through foreign investment.
Look, that's great to see that continued sort of commitment from the government. Hey, Josh, just on a lighter note, I know we both share a love of tennis, although my skills are nowhere near as good as yours. One of the things I personally admire, the world number one, our Australian Ash Barty, how impressively she speaks about her team whenever she does really well, and sort of in otherwise what would otherwise seem like an individual sport, right? I'm interested whether or not you see any lessons from people like Ash Barty or other sporting legends for some of our political leaders or business leaders. Anything you sort of take away from that?
Oh, I think there's a lot to be learned from the leadership on the sporting field, which can be translated into business life, political life, other walks of life, and particularly the perseverance. The thing about tennis players is you may lose one day and win the next, and the sun still shines in the morning after a loss. And I think it's that level of perseverance which is really important. And also just training towards a particular end and goal, and I think that's good. And of course, tennis may be seen as an individual sport, but when it comes to doubles or Davis Cup or Federation Cup, it's also a team sport. So ultimately, being a member of a team is important for Ash Barty, whether it's her personal team or whether it's her Australian teammates in other competitions.
100%. And I know one of the reputations that you've got around Parliament House, in fact, I've just read Malcolm Turnbull's book, and one of the things he says is there's no parliamentarian that works harder than you do. So I think the importance of that kind of perseverance is absolutely sort of key. Hey, just one, I know we've only got sort of 5 more minutes before you need to go in a pretty busy schedule. You sort of started by talking about it's obviously a pretty tough time with the pandemic at the moment, particularly in your home state of Victoria. Are there any positives that you kind of hope that will sort of come out of the current environment that will kind of last sort of, post-COVID, things either in the economy or society that have sort of jumped out to you that we're sort of doing differently that you hope will sort of last beyond this period?
Important question, actually. I think there's an acceleration through the COVID period of some trends that were underway already. And I'm particularly thinking about the take-up of technology, and the fact that we're having these calls on Zoom will inevitably mean that more people will do that, I think, on a permanent basis, and they may not need to hop in the car or hop in the plane to have those meetings. I also think more people will work from home. Not everybody, of course, but more people will work from home. I think there'll be more onshoring. We saw Westpac, for example, announce the other day about bringing 1,000 workers back into Australia because they're not going to have their call centres offshore, and I think that will be another trend. In terms of supply chains, Jeremy, we've been thinking very much about not relying on global supply chains in a crisis, and we don't want to leave ourselves vulnerable to that. This is not an excuse for protectionism, and certainly we cannot be making everything in Australia. It's not either physically possible or financially practical. But what we can do is improve our resilience in some areas, and that's what we'll be thinking about over the future period. And many countries like Australia had to go and source masks from other countries, for example, or other what are called personal protective medical equipment. And I think there's going to be a role there for niche manufacturing in certain areas for countries like Australia.
That makes sense. Hey, so one quick final sort of question. I mean, what do you think that investors and business leaders that are kind of on this call, what do you think they can do to sort of help the recovery, both local and indeed offshore ones that are sort of supporting local management teams?
Well, confidence is key. And Australia is better placed than nearly any other country in the world to make its way through this recovery. That's because, one, we entered this crisis with lower debt to GDP ratio than other countries, so we had that financial firepower to respond. Secondly, we've got some real natural advantages in certain industries. There'll continue to be strong demand. So our economy, I think, will continue to produce what is needed, particularly for the growth in the region. And then I think at the end of the day, we've got good people, and it's our skill sets and across the country. And I think we'll invest heavily in the skills agenda and the infrastructure agenda going forward. So we've very much got a plan as a government to map our recovery as a way forward for us. So I'm very hopeful that, one, we can find a vaccine. I can't give you a timeline on that, but that a vaccine can be found. The best and the brightest around the world are focused on that. But also that Australia will prove itself to be very resilient through this crisis and come back stronger on the other side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you say, Australia is doing so well compared to many other countries, and you're a good example of good people here. So, look, thanks so much, Josh, on behalf of the Anacacia community. We are fortunate to have a treasure of your calibre in the government during what's a pretty tough time on a global scale, and certainly in Australia as well. So we really appreciate your efforts and the efforts of your colleagues. So please keep it up, stay well and healthy, and thanks so much again for your support for Anacacia and just the broader community.
No problem. Thanks, Jeremy.